If you're after a garden that smells as good as it looks, here are 7 scented plants I wouldn't be without. You know, scent, perfume, fragrance, call it what you will, is just as important in a garden as colour. So I've chosen 7 plants which will fit perfectly into this cottage garden and which, to be absolutely honest, I would never be without. I grow them all. At number 7, no garden should be without this lavender. It is a wonderful accompaniment to roses, of which more later. When you do that with the flower heads, you release the aroma, and just as these are beginning to ripen in summer, you can go over with your shears, cut them all off and make lavender bags out of them to stick among your smalls. But there is another reason why you do that, and that is by cutting lavender back quite lightly, but just beyond the flowers in late summer. You're giving them enough time to produce new shoots from the base that will flower again next year. This is a plant from the Mediterranean. It likes sunshine, well-drained soil, and it's really well adapted to cope with high temperatures and the kind of hot summers we've been having recently. At number 6, Choisya, the Mexican orange blossom. Now this is a double whammy of a shrub. In fact, there are 2 distinct kinds. There's the plain green kind, and there's this sort of lime green kind, Choisya Sundance, which is much more vibrant acid yellow green than the plain one. I like both of them, and I'm particularly fond of the ordinary plain green one. It has wonderful white blossom in May and again in September. It's wonderfully fragrant, that blossom. Even the foliage is aromatic. Crush it and you'll get the aroma. You might like it, you might not. It's quite fruity. What I've done with Choisya is replace a lot of box hedging. It grows more vigorously, but I've clipped it into this great rolling sea. The leaves are shiny. It's pretty tough. In a really, really hard winter right up north, it might suffer. But I've grown it for years now, and it's a really good doer of a shrub. At number 5, we're going overseas. Here we have the Russian sage, Perovskia. Tall spires of lavender blue flowers, foliage which is rather finely cut and filigree. The great thing about this is that it's self-supporting. It doesn't need a stake until it gets older and heavier and then starts to go over. There are dwarfer forms now which are about half the size, but Blue Spire, this variety, has these glorious midsummer stems of flower that look a bit like a tall lavender, and here you can see there's still plenty to come. The fragrance, which you'll only get when you crush it, is a kind of hybrid between lavender and eucalyptus. If you feel a little bit bunged up, squeeze it. Ooh, tunes, lovely. At number 4, another plant which is aromatic rather than perfumed, but which has become an absolute stalwart of the summer garden now, the shrubby salvia. Now these have become deservedly popular in recent years because in most winters they will come through unscathed. These particularly woody kinds, you can chop them down come April and up will come new growth. The flowers can be scarlet like this one, Royal Bumble, or they can be purple or white or pale yellow, a good range of colours, and the ability to flower from one end of the summer to the next. Crush the foliage to get the aroma, or if you don't like it, don't, but it's really quite powerful. And the fragrance, the aroma does vary from species to species. Again, another plant for a good British summer. Well-drained soil, full sunshine, and you'll find that they make plants about 1.5 to 2 feet tall. Good fillers these for borders in between all kinds of other plants. Looking back, I suppose the first fragrant plant I ever grew was the sweet pea when I was a little boy. Big seeds, you could poke in with your finger, watch them come up. What you will have noticed this year in particular with sweet peas, any hot summer, they go over really rapidly. Like all peas and beans, they like plenty of moisture at the roots to fuel those flowers. And you also have to keep cutting them, otherwise they run to seed and stop blooming. So in a hot summer, sweet peas are a challenge, but this group of plants here are that bit more reliable. At number 3, a real border stalwart. Phlox. This is the herbaceous phlox, Phlox paniculata, with a panicle, that's the shape of the flower head, and these lovely oval leaves. This is not a plant for poor dry soil. It likes sunshine, but it likes a bit of beef at the roots. It's very quick to wilt when the soil dries out, so find it a spot where the soil can hold on to moisture, and then you'll get these gorgeous heads of flower which are delectably sweetly scented. Absolutely lovely. Unlike the Russian sage and the lavender, where you have to stroke it to release the essential oils, the aroma, those from the phlox come straight out into the open air. You can give these phlox something called the Chelsea chop. Third week in May, Chelsea Flower Show week, half the plant can be reduced, cut back, and the other half left to flower in its natural season. The half that you cut back will flower later in the summer, so you're keeping the interest going right the way through the year. I've never been bothered with that really. I'd rather just plant more, then you can cut one or two of them down completely and let them come up later. Before I move on to number 2, there is one plant that rather divides opinion, and that's this one, the curry plant. This is a kind of helichrysum. This is Italicum. Crush the leaves of it, they're covered in small grey hairs. Well, there's either a korma or a vindaloo there. It does smell of curry. Again, only when you bruise it. But it's actually rather a good front of border plant. It's really well furnished in terms of coping with heat and sunshine, because the tiny hairs which make it grey help to retain moisture. So in a sunny spot and well-drained soil, would it be in your top 10? Well, maybe not, but it's an interesting novelty, isn't it? At number 2, a British native, honeysuckle. The other common name is woodbine. To some that might smack of a cigarette, but wood, woodland, bine, a twining plant, and it is a plant of the woods. It can be quite an overpowering perfume after rain when the heat comes on it, filling the air. It's not just, oh that's nice, it's, oh my goodness, smell that honeysuckle. It really is quite powerful. They grow happily in woodland, but they also grow happily in a garden, trained up trellis to cover a shed. Imagine a shed that's been decorated with these glorious flowers. It's a lovely plant for sun or dappled shade. It's quite a good shade lover, this. Sometimes they can be a bit tricky and decide they don't like you and take a while to settle in. When they do settle in, they'll fill the air with fragrance, which is why I would always put this kind of Shakespearean Midsummer Night's Dream plant, the honeysuckle or woodbine, at number 2. I love it. A wonderfully modest plant, but a British native that's worth growing in any garden. So, have you guessed what's at number 1? It has to be, doesn't it, really? In a British garden, it's got to be the rose. This is rather a special rose. It's an English shrub rose. There are lots of them around now. Now, in the old days, the turn of the century, and before that, shrub roses would have one brief but glorious season of flower, mid-June through to mid-July, and that was it for the year. Then breeders came along and they bred repeat flowering shrub roses that start blooming in June and will flower off and on right the way through to autumn. And this one has a particularly glorious flower shape and colour. This is Duchess of Cornwall, named after the present Queen's former title. The most powerful of fragrances, and I love this kind of confused centre on the rose and the richness of colour here, which is a cross between pink and orange. When you're looking for a rose, choose one that has really good glossy leathery leaves as well, because that way it will be capable of shrugging off mildew and black spot. Healthy foliage in a rose, for me, is every bit as important as a beautiful flower and good fragrance, because if the foliage is poor, the whole thing is covered in disease and it's not a pretty thing to look at, not a pretty sight. But with Duchess of Cornwall, good foliage, beautiful flowers with a glorious fragrance that carry on right the way through the year. I'd give her a home in my garden. So there you are. The English rose is at number 1, and deservedly so. So those are my top 7 plants for perfume, fragrance and aroma. What are yours? Comment below. I'm transforming this traditional cottage garden to its former glory, and the best way to keep up with the action is by subscribing. I'm posting new videos every week.